Hello everyone and welcome to our next MegaCon Mini. Today's topic is Megagames at conventions. I am BeckyBecky, also known as Becky Campbell-Ladley, and I'm going to be hosting our panel today. And today we have two fantastic guests. We have, and I'm going to hand over to them because they will be able to introduce themselves much better than I will be able to, I'm sure. So our first guest is Peter Nixon. Hi Peter, can you tell us a little bit who you are and what your experience running Megagames at cons is? Just quickly, because we will be digging into that into more detail.
Okay, very briefly, my name is Peter Nixon. I am a designer who has moved around to the U.S. in the past couple of years, but I have been one of the main organizers for the design collective called the Megagame Coalition, who hosts Megagames at various conventions around the U.S., but with a main focus on Gen Con.
Brilliant. And our second guest tonight is Noah Allington of Michigan Megagames. Can you similarly let us know a bit more about you, Noah?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Noah Allington, like you said. I, with a colleague of mine out of Michigan, founded Michigan Megagames after Gen Con 2019. I'm less of a designer, more of an enthusiast, and actually helping Peter run some of the events at Gen Con 2021 was my first experience, really kind of in the deep end running games. I'd done some volunteer work with the coalition in 2019, and so yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah, no, I don't. Just to jump in, I don't think I've ever we actually touched base on that whole thing. So I mean, this was your first time being like a key organizer. Was it more or less work than you were expecting? Like, how do you have any key takeaways? Would you do it again?
Oh yeah, I'd absolutely do it again. I think it was, about as much work as I was expecting. I think not being a designer has its benefits in that, I'm just kind of trying to get the materials right to run the games that I was going to run, and I'm not worried about. I was only running Den of Wolves, which has been kind of tried and tested. So I feel like you had a lot more pressure where you were making kind of last minute edits and things like that before the game ran. But
yeah, it was a mess.
But from my perspective, it was about as much work, aside from the whole leaving things on the side of the road bit. But thankfully, that didn't impact our games at all. So
yeah, we had a last minute misplaced of Den of Wolves components. So Noah had to do some scrambling and hooked up with another Megagame crew in Chicago to get their components. So so he's from Detroit, got Chicago's games, run games in Indianapolis, which, if you're familiar with the U.S., are all several hours difference from each other.
Right. I mean, thankfully, we didn't lose any components. Actually, we just lost badges in the end. So it was good to have everything on hand.
Nice.
Last minute drama, hallmark of Megagame running, to be honest with you. So if anyone does have any questions for Peter or Noah, then please just pop those into the pub. You guys have already got well underway with questions, so that's great. But let's talk just a little bit in more detail. So Noah, you mentioned you ran Den of Wolves. Peter, what games have you run at Gen Con or other cons?
I've run probably too many to count, unfortunately. So I'll just do some of the highlights and the ones I ran this year. So specifically this year, I ran two versions of my As Thou Commands design, which is a create your own narrative universe / medieval power politics sim. Which I pivoted from its online version into an in-person version, and boy, it really works a lot better in person. I'm pretty happy about that.
I can imagine. I played in one of the play tests, and I could picture it so well in like a room environment.
It's really tough. I don't want to yuck anyone's yum, but I've played in a lot of online play tests, and the fact is the fact that only one person can talk at a time is grueling to me, and that really limits my enjoyment of online digital Megagames, unfortunately. But I don't want to. If you're happy, I'm happy, and there's a lot of great designs out there that are new and overcoming these various design challenges. And then I also ran another run of my Sickle game, which is a mega game based in the 1920 plus universe, which is the art universe that was turned into the board game Scythe, and then more recently into the video games Iron Harvest and its expansion. And so that's probably one of the more unique mega games in the sense that one, it's based on a pretty prominent IP. And we worked with the designers of the Scythe board game, so we got permission from them to use their art, and we agreed for them not to sue us and stuff like that. and that worked really well. It was a great experience, that one. We had pretty much all entirely new volunteer moderators, and that was partly because we went from having a surplus of moderators down to having 50% of the moderators that we needed over the course of probably about a week and a half, because that was Gen Con was pretty much the exact same time as the rise of the Delta variant in the US. So we had a whole bunch of people who were uncertain all of a sudden just backing out at the last minute, which put us in a huge bind. I can talk a little bit more about that, but I don't want to, if you have any specific questions or anything like that, Becky.
Sure. So the first thing that sort of comes to mind is, in terms of the games that you've run at conventions, do they have anything in common that you think makes them particularly well suited for conventions, or are there any types of mega game that you think are more or less suited for cons?
Noah, do you want to go first, or?
Yeah, sure. So, I think that at least how I view conventions are places to do things that you really can't do in your local community. So generally, what I mean by that is, being somebody who's working a 9-to-5 job, when you want to play board games on a weekly basis with your local group or whatever, you really only got, maybe 3 or 4 hours, maybe one day a week, or if you're lucky, maybe a weekend or something like that, or 8 hours on a Saturday or something like that. And so, generally people want to get in like all their normal kind of gaming experiences that they like to do on a regular basis. But then what my group likes to go to cons for are those experiences that you can really only get at conventions. And those are things that are going to require multiple hours. We wouldn't really spend 6 hours playing one game in our usual group. And so like a con is a great place where you have the luxury of the free time to say, I want to spend 6 hours playing Den of Wolves or 4 hours playing Scythe. And, if it's not the thing that I like the best, well, whatever, because I have plenty of more free time to explore the rest of the convention. And so I think that those sorts of experiences are what cons are great for, is, large time investments, large player counts. And I think the mega games really fit well into that.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Peter.
So, no, I think you hit the theming pretty much on the mark, but I have some specific points. And one thing I would actually disagree with you on is that the longer mega game experiences are like inherently more better or more apt for conventions. I think shorter mega games are not a problem at all, and in a sense they better fit into other people's con schedules, and therefore they're more likely to be attended. And then some other notes I have is the larger the player count, the better. And this is from kind of an economic standpoint, and a sense that we have a product that we want people to experience because we know it's awesome, and it serves as its own marketing, right? Like people who come to Mega Games tell other people at Mega Games how awesome they are. So the larger the player count, better. That's actually my number one critique with Den of Wolves, is that it only goes up to 43 players. And I would love it to reach at least 55, 60. I mean, it's such a good design, and I would never push it beyond its player count without changing the name and changing the design or whatever. And then the last things I have is the whatever design you have to understand that for conventions, pre-event information distribution is a problem. So you will not, only about a third of your players, being optimistically, will actually read the rules beforehand. And so the teach needs to be relatively easy. the last thing is that the U.S. scene, their frame of reference for Megagames is watch the skies. So the farther away you get from that, that's not like a bad thing, but you might have to deal with really setting the marketing frame of reference in potential players' mind when you advertise the game.
Well, that segues very nicely onto a question we've had from Chris, which is, do you find that people who attend cons know what Megagames are?
I'll go first for this one. Yeah, somewhat. You get a mix, I'd say. Our two frames of reference in my mind are essentially Gen Con and then like pretty much every other convention out there. And so at Gen Con, we get a fair amount of people who know what Megagames are. If you go to regional cons or even like something like Dragon Con, which is like a huge con in the US, but it's also focused on like comic books and cosplay as much as it's board games, you see a very, very steep drop off. So it depends on what convention you're going to. I would say you probably have the strongest recognition at Gen Con, PAX Unplugged, and Shuck. And if you go to other conventions, probably a lot less so. For Gen Con, our games do sell out very quickly. And then for other conventions, they tend to struggle to sell at all, even sometimes. So it's a convention by convention thing.
Yeah, I'll agree with a lot of that. I think something that I think is important to say kind of explicitly for those who aren't familiar with the like American convention scene is that the conventions have sort of a flavor, and so I think that kind of could impact the audience they draw. So Gen Con has a lot of RPG folks. Origins, one that runs in Ohio, it's more board game and miniature. It was at least historically a miniatures based convention. So you get a lot of, and it's the trade show for the board game kind of lobbying group. So you get a lot of the just traditional tabletop stuff. But I mean, we've tried to run things at regional conventions under Michigan Megagames. We tried to run a run of Den of Wolves there, and they put us in a really bad time slot. They put us at like noon on a Friday, which for a regional kind of local kind of convention, even though we do get 3,000 players and attendees, most of the traffic is coming on the weekends because they can drive and are local to the area. And so we ran a really limited run of Den of Wolves. Like we had probably 20 players or so. It was really kind of handicapped. And once the guy who was responsible for scheduling, like he was observing us play, and once he saw what it was, he was like, "Oh, these are great. We need to put these into a more primetime slot whenever we run that convention again." And that convention, as far as right now, won't be happening again until 2022. So hopefully in 2022 we can go back to them with some games, and maybe we can
it's tough.
Peter.
It's pretty frustrating to have such an amazing product that you can offer people, but like just other people they just don't get it. you know, they don't get it until they see it in action. So the first time you come to a convention, you just have to expect to undersell. Unless you really have the buy-in of the administrators of the convention, and that usually involves you knowing them personally, like being involved somehow like that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that guy he volunteers for a lot of the NSDM games. So once he saw it, it's like, oh, it's a lot like NSDM. I wish if I had known that background, we probably would have.
Hearing that comment makes me so frustrated, Noah. I've never heard that. Kills me.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
I think that brings up a really good thought about how to liaise with organisers. But just for the time being, I want to stay on sort of attracting the players. So do you have anything in particular that you do when trying to talk about Megagames to con attendees? Any it might vary from con to con, but how do you attract players to your game at the con and sort of communicate what they're signing up for?
Yeah, if you're talking to individuals and trying to recruit them to come to your event, I mean, I think you've probably already lost the cause, unfortunately. What you really need is buy-in and an advertisement from the con administrators. You want them to view the Megagame as like a headline event. And they may not. It may be too difficult or whatever. But in terms of advertising, you don't want to advertise to individuals. You don't want to go around like handing out flyers too much, although handing out flyers probably does help and has helped me in the past. What you want is to preach to crowds at the same time and get kind of either groups of friends or clubs to buy in collectively, because that's the scale that you just need to operate on.
Great. Do you have anything to add on that, Noah, or would you generally agree?
No, yeah, I generally agree. We at that local convention, we were flyering for it because we knew that if we're on a Friday at noon, we're not going to get a lot of folks, and that was a position we didn't want to be in. I think it would have been much better if we had a lot of the support of the con where they put us front page or something like that. But they were just mainly focused on their usual tabletop events, and I don't know if they had anything that novel in a long time.
Yeah, it's tough advice to give. It seems like it's like the question is like, how do you be better at advertising? And the answer is be better at advertising. And so it's tough. It's tough. It's really tough. I've been there. I've been on the street corner handing out flyers.
Yeah. So this might be more obvious for someone who's a bit of a con regular. I have to admit that I'm not. But what would you say are the good times to run these sort of sessions? What would you say are the prime times for mega games at cons?
I mean, we ran them pretty much morning till evening at Gen Con. And I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying about cons being kind of a space without time. I mean, granted, to Peter's point, yes, people do have to fit in what they want to do around they do have their schedule constraints. I didn't think I meant to imply earlier that longer games are necessarily better, but the fact that cons are kind of a space beyond your normal day-to-day time restraints makes them ideal for mega games. And so we were running things from 9 a.m. to 10 or 11 p.m. and even I think that's kind of been our standard at Gen Con. To add on to that, there is a noticeable precipitous drop off, and I'm talking about Gen Con specifically here, for the game that occurs on. We have one game on Sunday mornings because con ends at like 2 p.m. on a Sunday, or like 4 p.m. maybe. I forget the exact time, but essentially what happens with Gen Con, and this is Gen Con specific, is Sunday is the day where everything winds down dramatically. So if the game on Sunday is likely going to have like the 2019 Gen Con that we had, I think it had around 33% no shows on Sunday, which is like pretty high. And it messed up the design, unfortunately, and that was very unlucky. But if you're not running on Sunday morning, then you're pretty much good to go for the most part. Obviously, there's some times that are slightly better than others, but really outside the Sunday morning slot, you're fine. For other cons, it depends on you don't want to be on a Friday, you want to be on a Saturday. Essentially, is what you want for the regional cons, because then you get the people who couldn't make Friday because of work type of thing, or Friday nights, I guess, works too.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So while we're talking about scheduling, Ed has asked that generally when you go to a mega game, at least in the UK, often you'll have the air quote real debrief in the pub afterwards or going out for dinner. What is debrief like at mega games at cons? Do people tend to stick around for it, and do people tend to stick around and chat for a while afterwards, or are they rushing off to do something else at a different part of the con? Now you want to start with that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll take that. So, I think it's important to schedule time for debrief into your block time, because especially what we were doing at Gen Con, or so in Gen Cons of the past, and those of you who came out and hung out with us saw that we were running kind of double events. We were double booked all the con long. What we had for Gen Con 2021 is we were just back to back. Only our crew was so small that we pretty much were just doing a game, a flip, and then a game, then a flip. So we were building that debrief into our game time, and then because pretty much everyone who was there, or at least a lot of the volunteers who were there, were running kind of double shifts, helping out volunteering for a lot of the games. So there wasn't really a whole lot of time to go out after a game specifically. I think one thing we could have done better was maybe let people know, because we wound up hanging out at the hotel bar after we broke down for the night most nights. So I think that could have been a better thing to let people know, but most of the folks who were in our games were kind of off to do their next thing. So what I liked to do was, I would give some highlights of cool plays that I saw happening, and then because I'm one person, I only can see so much. I ask people to share their favorite things, and because we were doing back-to-back kind of things, I would have kind of clean up. I would ask the people to clean up their things so we can flip for the next game in between. But we just were deliberate about making debrief part of the experience and part of the time block.
Yeah, just to add on to that, as organizers, you aren't able to hit the pub every night just because and because we were understaffed, there were so many situations where I was working the Friday night game and the Saturday morning game, so I had to get sleep in between. And so that's unfortunate to a certain extent. In other years when we have had more volunteers, there is a lot more informal hanging out and stuff like that, which is great. The meeting up after the pub is a bit unfortunate because you have to, and this is true with other mega games too, is you have to break the game down and set it aside for the next event before you can go down and hang out with all the players and stuff like that. And sometimes that takes 10 minutes, but sometimes it takes 30 minutes or so to sort all the components out and stuff like that. But it's, I mean, when you do get to hang out, I felt a whole lot of camaraderie with the rest of the Mega Game volunteers, especially this year because we were so understaffed. I mean, I loved, oh my God, everyone, John, Tim, Scott, all those guys. Yeah, everyone was great.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. So, connected to that, how much would you say that attendance at cons contributes to sort of growth of the hobby? Do you think a lot of the people who come to one of your games at the con, maybe just their first game, come back to later cons, later mega games outside of cons, or come back year on year to later games at cons? Pete?
Yeah, totally. The answer is wholeheartedly yes. It's yes, period, yes, exclamation point. Just everything you said is yes. Yeah, I mean we have diehards that come back every year and always have an event, and we still have new players every time. So it's a nice mix, and it hopefully it keeps growing. And this year we were co-advertised with another kind of mega game crew who were running their own custom designs out of Chicago, who was headed by Sam, who looks like he's on the chat here. So shout out to him. And so the hobby's grown beyond just us. So hopefully that will continue.
Yeah, just to add on, I think it works kind of both ways, because we had some folks who came with us to volunteer, and then they volunteered in one game, and then they had booked out kind of the rest of their con to play some games with us, and they were like, "Oh, this is great! I didn't really know what I was getting into, and we just wanted to try it out." And the volunteering kind of helped them get a sense for it. And then other times we had a player who came up to us after one game, and he was like, "Hey, I'd really like to help observe and control for the next run of this." And yeah, absolutely, come hang out and check it out. And so now it seems like they've been pretty active in our Discord group and things like that. So we get a lot of interest on both sides.
Awesome. And just in terms of the type of players that you find at cons, do they differ to the sort of players you see at non-con games? Would you say it's a higher percentage of new players versus enthusiasts? Would you say that enthusiasts come to make an effort to come to cons because they know Mega Games are going to be there? What would you say your player breakdown is sort of like, and are they different in any other ways?
Yeah, before we jump into it, I just got to highlight, because of COVID, I have not experienced just games besides Gen Con, right? So my frame of reference might be a little bit outdated at this point.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but in general, you have less new people when you're from games at cons, I would say. Although I'd be interested to hear Noah's take. But you also have a much higher percentage of people who did not read the rules beforehand. So, all in all, it's a wash in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah, as far as like, so it's interesting they're making the distinction between like convention and non-convention games, because in my experience, I mean, maybe Peter's lived in many more kind of population dense areas, but like, looking into the logistics of running a game not aligned with a convention is pretty tricky where I live, just because my metro area has probably around 2 million people, but they're spread out probably over 1,000 square miles or something like that. The Detroit metro area is very sparsely populated, and so getting people to travel, it's hard to do the advertising to get people to travel 30 miles or something like that. So like the only times I've experienced games not at conventions, I drove to Ottawa to play with the Ottawa Megagamers very shortly before the pandemic. Like it was like early March or something like that of 2020. But it seemed like they had a good group out there. So it seemed like it was very much a group of enthusiasts who were all like ready to go and kind of knew the drill. Whereas, there's a lot of rules explaining that has to go on at conventions because people just say, "Oh, that looks cool." They buy a ticket and show up.
Cool. So related to what you were saying, Peter, about not really having seen, not having been to any games outside of Gen Con recently, how we are of course interested in how the community is going to bounce back post-COVID. So what was the attendance like at Gen Con this year versus 2019?
Yeah, so it was exciting because we still sold out initially. And then the Delta wave hit and our ticket numbers kept fluctuating, but were generally near selling out or selling out. They would keep going up and down. But that, I was worried still wasn't indicative because I was worried you'd get a lot of people who just they bought a ticket and then they just forgot about it, and it turns out they're just not coming to Gen Con and they aren't going to return the ticket. Mm-hmm. And this is a little PSA for all the Gen Con attendees. If you buy a ticket and you don't show up to an event and turn in the ticket, Gen Con keeps all the money and we don't see any of it. So that's like the worst case outcome. From our perspective. It's a real bad policy, I'd say, unfortunately. But I don't know the logic behind it. But we're a small part of Gen Con, which is this huge convention, so I'm sure they have their reasons. When it actually came down to it, we had about, I would say, our games were consistently at 2/3 attendance. Would you agree with that, Noah?
No, I think ours, well, at least on the games that I ran, I think overall I only didn't sell something like 6 tickets. And maybe we had to comp a couple. But I would say my games were at probably 85 to 90%. There was one game that was weirdly undersold, but then the other two where we were at capacity for the most part.
Gotcha. Yeah, so 2/3 to 80%, that range varied from event to event.
Whereas in 2019, were you at full capacity?
Yeah, we were at so normally I'd say 95% of people show up, and then on Sunday there's a huge drop off that I mentioned previously. But besides that, generally 95% of people show up, which is great for people who reach out for the waiting list. Like the waiting list is always opens up, which is nice. But it sucks to always have people who buy tickets and don't show up, I'd say, not to gloss over that fact. I would like to mention specifically how awesome the attendees were this year. Like, they were so excited to be there. Everyone was just so thankful that the convention was happening at all. Everyone was wearing a mask, like everyone was keeping safe distance. My number one concern going into Gen Con, other than the health and safety aspect, was audio issues with the mask. And it turns out we went from being in the stadium, which has a lot of din, into a hotel room, and that was just awesome because you could hear people like pretty much 95% clearly. And that was great. And our events like didn't go, or I should say my events. Noah's events went great, but my events did not go well in the traditional organizer perspective. Like I was dealing with a lot of COVID, and we were also understaffed due to volunteers, and I was making last minute design decisions, and I had also I was going to defend my thesis the following week, so I was dealing with that as well. And yeah, between how awesome all the players were and how awesome our volunteers were, like it all ended up coming together and really in some cases barely passing the line, and in some cases far surpassing the line.
I think Peter's a bit hard on himself. I think everyone had a great time, and I think that's kind of designer bias, right? You notice the things that you wish would have gone better, but I think from the perspective of most of the players, I think everyone had a great time, and even the volunteers were doing great, and we were rolling with the punches and trying to give everyone a good experience. And I think we pulled it off, definitely.
Well, thank you, Noah. Those kind words.
One thing I think that was a struggle too with COVID was kind of it made casting a struggle for games that required like casting ahead of time because a lot of that churn that happened. So I had gone through and taken the time and tried to assign casts, and then everyone dropped out, and I just didn't have the time to recast half of the attendees of all the games, and so that was a bit of a pain point. And hopefully as COVID hopefully becomes less of a concern going forward, obviously there's going to be some churn of players, but hopefully not 50% churn 2 weeks before the games again. That was a bit of a trouble point, getting people checked in and resorting where people should go on the day. That was tough.
Yeah, that sounds it. So Dan has asked for the UK folks or anyone that hasn't been to Gen Con, can you just talk a little bit more about the space that you hold the games? So what the stadium is. I can see that Texarkana's put a very helpful photo in there, but can you just talk a little bit more about what the format has been like at Gen Con?
Oh yeah, I would love to talk about this now, if that's okay.
Oh, absolutely.
I now have I'm a new hotel lobby or hotel room evangelist. Since as long as I remember before this year, the coalition was always stationed out in the Indianapolis Colts Stadium, literally on the field of the football field. So they put down stuff over the grass, and they just host events like literally on the stadium. So to get to the middle of the field, you have to like walk into the stadium and then walk down the stairs and then walk onto the field, which is pretty neat. But also, it is horribly noisy, and so we have to hook up like huge speakers and really get people to talk into microphones if you want to project to an entire crowd and stuff like that. And the din, which we contribute to, is just the most consistent problem that we have to deal with every year, and there's just no good way to deal with it. And I think I'm so happy about the improvement to the hotel room. Just like the lack of din makes me so irrationally happy.
Yeah. Empty indoor football stadiums are very echoey places, and there's lots of people doing things that are not related to what we're doing, and so it is very hard to talk over.
Yeah, and there are points when our crowd of 50 plus people are cheering, and then there are crowds where other events in the stadium are cheering. And so you're just like kind of like occasionally just looking over at each other, like what's going on, and you just don't have to deal with that anymore. I hope we get a hotel room next year. It's not guaranteed, but fingers crossed. I can dream.
Yeah, the amount of noise that Megagames make on their own is just so intense. It sounds like a great atmosphere for the con in general, but yeah, I can imagine that being a bit
Yeah, just to throw in another little parable, when we were planning this year, they were consolidating on space because of COVID. You know, a lot of organizers who usually come weren't going to come, and they were like, Peter, this is great. We have an improvement for you. We are going to stick you right in the middle of the convention center on the floor where all the other vendors are. And they pitched that like it was an improvement. And I do explain as like, well, you know, there's going to be like 100+ people, and we're going to be using loudspeakers, and I think we'd be disrupting to the other events around us. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then we ended up in a hotel, which is perfect.
Yeah, much better solution, I'd say.
Yeah.
So let's circle back to something that we did touch on briefly earlier, which was you said that a much higher percentage of players don't read the rules ahead of time. So can you talk a little bit about how you brief players, like what you do send out ahead of time, what you try and do on the day? Noah, can we start with you for that?
Yeah, so, I mean, this question is kind of very con-specific. I mean, there's at least dealing with Gen Con and the local convention that I tried to schedule something with, getting direct access to players to communicate with them ahead of time is very difficult. Cons are, they don't want to give, I mean, rightly so, they don't want to give out the contact information of folks who have registered for your game. And so what we have to do is we have to ask them, well, one, we have to hope that they're going to read the sign up or the all the details on the sign up form. So for Gen Con, what we did this year is we said, if you're buying a ticket to this event, and please fill out this additional Google form. And that message was on the site that they registered and bought their tickets through, and then it went to them in their email for the confirmation. And even so, you know, there was, you know, probably a 50%, if not less, compliance rate with that. So communicating directly to players is very difficult. And so, like Peter was mentioning earlier, you really, again, have to take time. I mean, there should be time for a teach anyway, but you really have to make sure that the teach is good. And, you know, I noticed that in some of the games that I ran where I may have glossed over a critical piece here or there, and I thought I'd given it enough attention, and then people were saying, oh, no, how does this work exactly? So you really have to get the teach right to make sure you're not missing anything.
Yeah, in a lot of regional cons, you're just straight up not able to communicate with the players beforehand, right? So there's no way to have pregame communication at all. For Gen Con this year, they just launched an ability to send out messages to everyone who signed up for an event, which is great. In previous years, we had to like beg for people's emails, and then they had to like, you know, shake their finger at us like, we're not going to allow this next year. Like, this is against privacy concerns, but we trust you guys to do the right thing. And so they eventually stopped doing that. But we now have this wonderful tool to send direct messages essentially through the Gen Com message system, which is very nice. And hopefully more cons will do that in the future, but I don't imagine a lot of cons have the individual infrastructure for that.
Yeah, even some of the local cons, you don't even really get much in the way of an event description or anything like that. So really, people are a lot of times they could even be going in blind and not really knowing what the event is at all. If you only have a couple hundred characters to describe what your event is.
That sounds like a big challenge. So we've had a question from Chris about casting questionnaires. Does that mean generally you can't do anything like that ahead of games either? And if not, how do you handle casting?
Yeah, we tried to do it this year, and like I mentioned earlier, there's probably a 40 to 50% response rate. And then of the people who responded, a lot of them decided that they weren't going to come anyway. So, I mean, that was a this year specific issue, but hopefully, you know, going forward, at least through Gen Con, we'll be able to do casting questionnaires. We did do them this year, and I tried my best to honor them for, at least we did them for Den of Wolves. I don't recall what Peter did for them. But, you know, at the end of the day, I had to, you know, throw most of it out and just kind of cast people as they walk through the door because of the enormous turnover. I remember playing some games in 2019 where we actually did get it to work, but I didn't organize really in 2019, so I'm not sure exactly what the perspective was for that convention.
Yeah, I tend to. A lot of my designs don't use any precast information. They just the teach is day of, and the roles are assigned day of, and that's just the way it's easier that way sometimes. So yeah,
that sounds a lot more straightforward when you're doing a con and you don't know who exactly is going to be turning up.
Noah, can I? Sorry, Becky. Go
ahead.
Go
for it.
All right, Noah. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. Do you have any Gen Con highlights to come to mind if I were to press you on that?
Highlights in general?
Yeah. Megagame, not Megagame related, whatever. It was a crazy year this year,
It was, yeah. I think like you had mentioned earlier, just the energy where everyone was super glad to be there. Like everyone could feel the energy. Everyone was willing to try things. Like, we were like, Den of Wolves has a trader mechanic, and so we were trying to find who would be a suitable trader. Everyone was just kind of willing to play along and go through things and struggle through. I think I might steal yours, Peter, but we noticed that there were like no walkouts, and generally usually some people decide that mega games aren't for them, or the one game they're playing isn't for them, and they want to walk out. And I think, what did we see one person walk out or something like that over 6 events?
Yeah, there were 0 walkouts for every event up until Sickle. And Sickle had like 2 to 3 walkouts, but Sickle, it's a really divisive design relative to the others, and there's some kind of broader context to it that makes it a little bit more explainable. But that's definitely a highlight for me too. Go ahead now if you want to mention any more.
No, I think that was it. And just kind of working with everyone, all the volunteers were great. It was just great to be in a place where we could be around people in person again and just hang out. That was a really nice highlight after the last 20 months or whatever.
Yeah, me too. I'd like to echo that. Just Michelle and Patrick and Sean, and everyone was just so awesome. It was so great, and our players were so great too. From a Gen Con perspective, something non-Mega Game related was I was walking around. Did you got a chance, I imagine, to walk the actual convention floor, right, Noah?
Yeah.
It was like it was still crowded, but it was just so nice. Like I walked like at a slower than normal walking pace, and just like really just enjoyed my time in the convention center in a way that I just had never before. And just because it was so much less crowded and there was just less bustle, and maybe I was wearing a mask, so maybe it didn't like smell quite as bad.
Yeah, well, I get the sense that's going to be a 1 year only kind of highlight, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm kind of bummed that I'll never experience that again. I would stop and like talk to people because there was no rush, and it was really nice.
Or I guess if you enjoy that sort of con vibe, come to Origins. I know we were planning on it this year, but next year for sure we should make it a thing, because Origins is much more toned down if you enjoy that sort of experience.
Yeah, I didn't realize it. I never realized that would be my jam, but I guess so. Next year, Origins, stream big.
Yeah, I totally get the whole just taking in the vibe. I've got my first live mega game in 2 weeks, and I just think I'm just gonna. And you mentioned earlier about how enthusiastic all the players are. I just think that the first few mega games after everything opens back up in the UK are just going to be insane. So we've got a question from Chris, which is, are the logistics of running a mega game easier or harder when you're at a con? And I imagine different bits are easier and harder. So can you talk a little bit about that? Let's start with you, Peter.
So I would say overall they're easier. I would say overall. there are individual things you have to worry about, right? And overall, you have to coordinate with this sometimes small, sometimes large, sometimes organized, sometimes disorganized, like convention administration. But I think the fact that you don't have to worry about space, like you don't have to go out and find your own space and worry about like insurance and that type of thing, I think is a pretty large benefit. When you host stuff at conventions too, generally, like I leaned on Noah for things, he leaned on me for things. Like if I were just running that, in Washington D.C. or New York City or wherever I am, I might not have as a diverse support system because, in a normal year we have like the guys from Ohio would always bring the AV. The guys from Chicago would always bring the Watch the Skies stuff, like that. Everything was kind of already settled because everyone already has their niche to a certain extent, which is great. I think that's kind of the big takeaway. I don't really have any specific insights in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I think the hardest thing, having looked into scheduling things not at a con, is space. Trying to make the numbers work for renting a place for a day, getting AV equipment and things like that. Like that whole infrastructural piece, it's so much easier when you're at a con. And I guess we still they still try to nickel and dime us for AV and stuff, but we've kind of solved that problem now that we decided to make a capital investment in some AV stuff that we can share. But yeah, like just trying to figure out, okay, where is this going to be? How much is it going to cost us? The pressure of like, are we going to be in the hole after we run this? That sort of thing. It kind of gets removed when you're at a con and you have, for lack of a better term, a captive audience. You've got people who are there. They're going to buy tickets. They're going to come try new cool experiences. That's the easy part. And you have built-in advertising if you have a reputation with the con too. Like we had a full page in the con program at Gen Con this year.
Yeah, which they didn't even talk to me about. And usually they ask our permission before they do that. But this year they just decided to throw us in there, which was, I guess, nice of them. But it just goes to show you that like we can have and other groups around the country can have a mutually beneficial relationship with the con. Like people come to conventions specifically to Megagame, right? And that was a big takeaway when I hosted the 2019 Shucks Megagames, is we had a bunch of people who like didn't know who Shut Up and Sit Down were, essentially come and play our Megagames. We had a crew from New Zealand fly out and play in all 6 of our Megagames that we hosted, which is absolute madness in my opinion.
That's incredible.
Yeah, they were awesome, and I asked one of them what their secrets were to their energy and endurance, and they looked at me and they told me with a straight face, and I believe them at this point. The secret was organic vegetables. So there's a pro tip for everybody.
The next hot giveaway project at Megagames to keep you going the whole day through.
Yeah. All right, our auction, the winner of our beat raffle.
So, what would you say? We're sort of coming towards the end. What would you say are the best and worst things about running games at Megagames at conventions? So, Peter, let's start with your best.
Okay. Best is the captive audience for sure. Just the fact that you are just more likely to sell out than else places. And the infrastructure. Unfortunately, the answer to these questions are things that we've pretty much already talked about for the most part. The other thing is like in the past I've designed mega games of various styles that some had a high moderator count, some had a low moderator count. For as commands, for example, you need a 1 moderator per 6 players, and that's a pretty hard limit. Although we ended up running it with under that this Gen Con, but that was not ideal. If I were to run it at one of the cities that I live and operate in, I would be essentially tapping my 100% of my social structure to run a high moderator mega game. So the volunteers at conventions are pretty great.
Great. And how about your least favorite thing about running them?
The least favorite thing, oh man, that's tough. It's tough this year, especially because I had such a positive experience. The least favorite thing probably would be the no-shows. This might be a Gen Con specific problem, but the percentage of no-shows is can be high under various circumstances. Especially as I mentioned previously, Sunday morning and sometimes Saturday morning to a certain extent. But just in general, like, if you buy a ticket, like, you should come. That should be just a thing, right? You should be teleported to the event. Yeah, I've never been in a position where I've bought a ticket for an event at Gen Con and not gone. So I'm curious what the individual life circumstances are that lead people to make those decisions. I imagine they're nuanced and valid, but as someone just posted in the chat, people may get drunk and stay up too late and then sleep in. So
yeah, I doubt it is a Gen Con only problem. I imagine we don't do a lot of cons in the UK because they are generally. We do have, I believe people have had no shows at cons in the UK, so I really don't think that is a Gen Con only problem. Noah, let's come to you and let's do least favorite thing first, so that we're finishing on high.
Least favorite, all right. I love conventions and I love doing Megagames at conventions, but I will say that they are very physically and maybe not emotionally, but socially draining, at least for me. Basically being on for 12, 16-hour days, 2 days, 3 days in a row, it can wear on you. So making sure we have a good supply of snacks and things like that around is always crucial. But generally, I really love the experience. It's just one that, like, when Peter came into the chat before we started talking, he's like, asked if I recovered. And it's like, you definitely do need some recovery time after one of these experiences, because you're going all the time. You only get, well, maybe it's a bit different again this year because we were the crew basically. So everyone who was there was basically working the whole time. But even in 2019, I felt there was a bit of recovery time in the week, but taking a half hour for a meal break in the middle of a game and things like that sort of stuff just kind of wears on you for the 3 days that you're there.
Can I add on to that briefly real quick?
Sure.
Is usually at Gen Con and other conventions, you have a near 100% chance of getting con crud, which is just like a general sickness that everyone gets. And it takes like half a week to recover at the convention. And that's on top of being like essentially emotionally drained and recovering from the overall high of being at a convention for 4 days. This year, because everyone was masked, me and everyone I've spoken to, nobody got con crud, which is kind of like a unique experience. It's a very strange thing.
You stole one of my positives, Peter. Come on.
Oh yeah, and I guess on a related note, I've only heard of tangentially, this is like a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, one breakthrough COVID case in all of Gen Con, which was I don't know what the actual attendance numbers were this year, but I bet they were above.
I think
like
it was
40,000.
around 40,000. Yeah.
Yeah.
Regularly 70-ish. So.
I mean, everyone was the only people who I didn't see not wearing their mask over their nose and mouth were like hotel staff and like local waitresses and stuff like that. Which, I mean, they're Indianapolis natives. They might tend to be more conservative people and stuff like that. We don't need to get into it, but it was remarkable overall.
Brilliant.
All right. Positives.
Noah, positive, yeah.
I mean, I think cons are just a great place in general. Like I was talking before about how kind of sparse my metro area is. So like, with high populations, you have statistically better, I guess not better odds, but the more the law of large numbers starts to apply, where people who have niche interests, you have just more of them just because you have more people around. And so I think what cons do is concentrate all those people in one place. So you get to be around all the people who are interested in the same and doing the same fun things that I've wanted to do Megagame since I saw the Watch the Skies thing in 2014. But where I lived, it was kind of like a desert, and it finally took until I found the Megagame Coalition for Gen Con in 2019 to finally find like the groups that were doing that sort of thing. So I think cons are just kind of magic, and I've kind of described them in somewhat magical terms already earlier this conversation. It's places without time and things like that, which they all kind of feel like. So yeah, I just enjoy the general aspect of the con, and glad that they're back after a long period of no social interaction whatsoever.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you both so much for sharing all of your thoughts about running Megagames at cons. We are going to be keeping this voice channel open and, of course, the pub open after we actually finish off the event. But first, I just wanted to share a couple of bits of news from MegaCon. So our next MegaCon Mini will be taking place on the 7th of November. And that is talking about Megagame adjacent hobbies. So we've actually got some Megagamers who are involved in escape rooms, immersive theatre and LARP design, who are going to be coming along and sharing their experiences of those hobbies and how hobbies/industries and how the Megagaming community can learn from those. So that's going to be on the 7th of November, and we're going to be releasing all the information about that within the next week or so, around the same time that we release the video from this event. And just a reminder that MegaCon 2022 is going to be taking place next February, the 4th to the 6th of February. We will hopefully be releasing details of the Megagames that we've got planned and ticket sales within the next month or so. That's the plan. Is there anything else I've forgotten to say news-wise, Chris? I don't think so.
No, you've covered it.
Perfect.
I'd love to do a quick plug if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
I'd be remiss to not plug. So Sam Bassetti, who is a Megagame designer, starting up a kind of a Chicago design collective, has a successful Kickstarter going on for a kind of a 2 rooms and a boom style, kind of like Megagame light style experience called Mischief of Faction. It's a kind of a gerrymandering sim. But it very much feels like 2 rooms to boom, where essentially it's hidden roles mixed with mixing of social groups. If you're familiar with the game, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But anyways, if that's the type of thing that may interest you, I'd go ahead and check out the Kickstarter. It's Mischiefs of Faction.
That sounds really cool. Thanks for sharing that. I will put the link into the description of our YouTube video as well, and I can see that you've dropped it into the pub as well. Have you got anything you want to plug, Noah?
I do not have anything to plug. So yeah, just thanks for having us. It was great.
Yeah, thank you so much. Where can people find more about the games that you run online? Well, not the games that you run, the games that you... Where online can people find more about the games that you run?
For me, I think the best channel would be just to follow the Megagame Coalition online. I believe our website is megagamecoalition.com. My group is fairly small. We haven't run anything in person because we formed right before COVID. So anything we do, we'll try to share through that and also through the Megagame Alliance calendar. But yeah, so we'll try to keep the broader community informed as we're doing more in-person things in the coming months.
Cool.
I guess on a side note, I don't want to get us too much off on a tangent, but it seems like most of the designers in the US that I'm aware of are doing kind of online games for the most part, or they're just getting started, and potentially we'll see kind of Megagames go up in the next year, lockdown lifting pending. but I guess two design collectives that I'm aware of are the Omega Crew and what is John and Scott's
Project Nexus.
Yeah, Project Nexus, and you can Google both of those for more information. But if you're in the U.S. and you're interested in this kind of digital scene, I highly recommend joining those discords for the experience and the social interactions.
Brilliant. And I'm sure those links are going to be added any moment now into the pub channel. So yeah, feel free to stick around here for more chat in the voice chat or in the pub. But yes, thank you so much once again, Peter and Noah, and have a good evening, everyone.